This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
About the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
On April 1st, 2011, the legendary scholar Manning Marable died suddenly at the age of 60. We'd like to dedicate today's show to the legacy and the work of Manning Marable, who was about to publish his groundbreaking study, The Life of Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. You're watching Left of Black, and I'm Mark Anthony Neal. Good afternoon. You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and we're joined this afternoon by Dr. Kimberly Ellis, aka Dr. Goddess. How you doing today, Kim?
I'm doing great, Marcus. I'm so happy to be here on Left of Black.
And you know, this has been a long time in the making. We've known each other now, you know, more than a decade. I mean, I'm thinking 12, 13, 14 years. Definitely cyber colleagues.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, you've always been one of my favorites. And in fact, I mean, I feel like I know you so well. I need to be coming over for dinner. You know, I know your family, I feel like.
Well, we're so happy to have you on Left of Black. You have a bunch of projects going on, and so we'll just jump into it. The DVD release of Dr. Goddess Goes to Jail. You know, for folks who don't know who Kimberly Ellis is, aka Dr. Goddess, activist, scholar, performance artist, and most folks probably know you for your work as an artist. So talk a little bit about Dr. Goddess Goes to Jail.
Sure. Well, the thing is, Mark, you know, I am an academic, and, you know, people have been reintroduced to me as an artist. And I can tell you for a long time I lived a double life because I grew up in the arts. I've been an artist all of my life. But my father was a starving artist, and he also died when I was 9. And so for my family, you know, education was extremely important, and we appreciated the arts. But my mother was not trying to, you know, hear me say that I wanted to be like a full-time artist. I went on to become an American Studies and Africana Studies professor of history and literature. And so, but the entire time I was getting my doctorate, I was also dancing in Johari Dance Troupe at Purdue. I was a member of the New Directional Players. I choreographed 14 dance pieces for Johari Dance Troupe, and I created a Kwanzaa song. And I was there long enough to create a dance theater for the Kwanzaa song that was done for Purdue's anniversary, their Black Alumni anniversary at the Black Cultural Center, the grand opening of the Black Cultural Center, by the way. So all that to say, I led this sort of double life. And you know, you knew me online as Goddess initially, and then my friends and other people started saying, well, what's going to happen when you graduate? What are we going to call you? And you know, so they were messing around, and then somebody offered Dr. Goddess, and I started laughing. You know, I mean, look, in the academy, you have to have a sense of humor.
Absolutely.
We have to bust out these ivory towers. We have to, you know, reach into ourselves and, you know, just amuse ourselves. So if you can't laugh at yourself, then, you know, you're definitely on the wrong path. So I took on Dr. Goddess, and I realized once I moved back to Pittsburgh to teach at the University of Pittsburgh that I could merge like my artistic sensibilities with my academic sensibilities. So that's where Dr. Goddess comes from, as well as, you know, a clear womanist, you know, feminist, you know, pronouncement on the world. And so that's where Dr. Goddess comes from. Now, Dr. Goddess Goes to Jail comes from the fact that when I moved back here to the historic Hill District of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I found my community in like many other communities. We are an African-American, lower socioeconomic class community, and I found one foot in development and the other in abandoned lots and buildings. And I saw the community that I grew up in, the community that loved me, you know, had my first job. I worked at, you know, the Oznam Cultural Center, in a bit of disarray and in need of some assistance. And then right at that point, in 2006, I found out that a company was trying to put a casino in the front yard of my neighborhood. And so I've been an activist since I was 15 or 16 years old. And I didn't think that I would be on any type of crusade by myself. But basically, because we've had disenfranchisement and disinvestment in our community, some people thought that the only way we could empower ourselves as a community was to allow this casino in. And I just said, no, absolutely not. And went on this crusade. That's actually how I became a blogger. I didn't even really know about the blog world. I just got online and sent emails out using my email messaging from my tour. I was on tour with Dr. Goddess, a one-woman show. And then when I came back home, that's when my neighbors were like, what's going on here? And who's passing out these free t-shirts and these free hats and these, DVDs with pictures of tree-lined streets? And, we were never intended to, continue to live here if that were to happen.
Right.
So all of that to say, because that was a real live campaign, and we actually won. We won. Can you believe it?
I remember.
And because we rarely win. And so people were sort of amazed at how I mixed scholarship, art, and activism. And for me, there's no separation.
Right.
I am of the Du Bois and the Ida B. Wells and the, Ella Bakers and the Anna Julia Cooper variety. So I was just doing what I knew to do. And other people were really impressed and in some ways amazed. And I'm just happy that we won, because it really would have been disastrous. So having said that, because our communities are obsessed with Tyler Perry and Medea Goes to Jail, I thought that as a real live Black woman that could write her own shows, that I would write this play and call it Dr. Goddess Goes to Jail, a spoken word musical comedy, unfortunately based on a true story. So we were on tour. We were listed as one of the best shows in Pittsburgh in 2007 out of 165. We made it into the top 20. And because it's a big cast and it stars 4 little girls, as well as others, it's now on DVD. And I wrote it with educators in mind. So people can catch that at drgoddess.com/4educators.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by Dr. Kimberly Ellis, a.k.a. Dr. Goddess. Let's talk a little bit about Pittsburgh, or the Burgh, as folks like to refer to it. We had your Siri X on a couple of weeks ago, talking about the activist scene there. And this is a city that doesn't get a lot of play in terms of its cultural legacy. This is a place where, August Wilson imagined the world on stage, the Black world on stage. This is a place that produces someone like, Charles Teeny One-Shot Hodges, who does all these incredible, photography, about the city and everyday folks. What's it like being based in Pittsburgh now and trying to kind of chart a cultural future, for yourself and also for the city?
Well, that's interesting that you asked, because first of all, shout out to Jasiri X. That's my brother in art and citizenship and activism and crime. And, living in Pittsburgh is interesting, because I just wrote on August Wilson. There's a book coming out called Approaches to Teaching August Wilson by the Modern Language Association. And I have a chapter in there which starts off A Tale of Two Cities. And that's really what Pittsburgh is like. It's like, first of all, just know that Pittsburgh continues to be voted America's most livable city. And, if you're Black, we laugh, because, we have high levels of Black poverty. We have, I think the Center for the Study of Race and Culture, I believe, they put out this study basically showing that Black Pittsburgh is really on the level of like Alabama and in some cases Mississippi. Now that's just terrible, because we're supposed to be this Northeast modernized city, right? And you've got a lot of people struggling, and so that's why you have this cultural mecca. But I want to remind people that Black Pittsburgh goes all the way back to even the Underground Railroad. Basically we came up through these Appalachian Mountains, and we're following the river and hiding in caves, and obviously following the North Star on our way to Canada. And so some of us stopped here and created community. Martin Delaney is from here. Right. There's a historic marker downtown. We have a UNIA chapter that was here. We had the Workers of the World here. I mean, Pittsburgh has been a bastion of a lot of activists and great activity, but in many ways, that's not the narrative that Pittsburgh carries of itself. Right. Now we're one of the greenest cities. You all know that we hosted the G20. Ooh, ooh. I'm joking. And it's interesting, because it's like living a double life in some way. And those of us who are change agents, we definitely want to bridge the gap, and we are proud of our communities, because they cultivate us, and we live in spite of them. I live in the Hill District, and we've got Homewood. John Edgar Wideman is from Homewood.
Right,
So
right.
all of that to say, yes, we have a very rich cultural legacy. And if you come to the Hill District, one of the things that I do is I give tours. I am a founding executive director of the Historic Hill Institute. So you should check us out at historichill.org and sign up for a tour for your family reunions and whatnot. And I'll show you the August Wilson Center downtown.
Mm-hmm.
I'll show you the Hill District, Homewood, and the rest of Black Pittsburgh. So come on through.
Yeah, Pittsburgh had the blackest baseball team in the 1970s. I mean, the Pittsburgh Pirates are kind of like Black America's baseball team with Willie Stargell and Manny Sanguine and Doc Ellis and all those cats, yeah. One of the things I've always liked about your work, and you're watching Left to Black, I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with Dr. Kimberly Ellis, a.k.a. Dr. Goddess. You have always functioned as this public intellectual. As you mentioned earlier, right, your activism and your scholarship have always gone hand in hand in this desire to be able to write and perform for the broadest audience possible. How has social media changed that experience for you? Again, our relationship goes back to, listservs and heated and spirited conversations and debates and, all kinds of things. When there was no, Web 2.0, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook. How has these new tools, enabled you to do your work, at this moment?
Yes, I have to say, Mark, I wasn't always cognizant of myself as a public intellectual. I mean, I didn't strive for, the fame and the glory. I guess, it was just the passion and the commitment to social justice. And I think that if you have that, you will be thrust into the limelight. You will be thrust into the public because you have to engage the public. Right. And if you're like me and you want to win, you want to win those electoral campaigns, you want to win those campaigns. I mean, those issues campaigns, they're important. They change our lives, right? And like I said, I come from the Du Bois variety and the Ida B. Wells variety. So I never saw my work in the public as somehow separate or distinct from my work in academia. But I realized, and as I'm sure as you realize later on, you become this distinct entity. And I thought, wow, I wasn't entirely prepared for that. And in fact, had I been more prepared, I would have actually cultivated that public intellectual personality. And I really didn't. I started the All Eyes on Tulsa campaign, as you know, to secure reparations for the Tulsa race riot, war, and massacre of 1921, those elderly survivors that were still there. I just felt that I couldn't go to Tulsa and do the scholarship on so-called Black Wall Street and then not help the people that were still alive. But for me, it's like after we were finished with that campaign, after we took it all the way to the door of the Supreme Court in May 2005, it's sort of like I hit it and quit it. I move on to the next thing or whatever the next challenge is going to be. So I have to say that social media has reinvigorated my life as a public intellectual because when I toured my show, I wasn't on Facebook promoting. Twitter did not exist, which is amazing. Or if it did exist, it existed in that small beta stage with those private friends, and I wasn't included. So now, however, what happened is I got on Twitter as Dr. Goddess because I thought, well, I can promote my art and the work that I do. And what I found, Mark, and I'm sure what you've also found, is that Twitter is ripe for, Twitter will teach you, about your market, and Twitter will teach you what people want. And so once our Twitterites found that there was this bastion of Black intellectuals, and I have to say this, the Black scholars in particular, it taught me that people are starving for information. They love Africana studies. They love it, but they're not encouraged to take those classes in college. I learned how to market my show by marketing Africana studies classes. I mean, nobody else had to go out and make flyers, and just say, hey, come to my class, and won't this be exciting? And, that was the introduction. So the response to Twitter has taught me that I have this space to fill it conscientiously and to have fun with it. I like the fact that Twitter allows us a full dimension of our humanity because, we can be laughing about something so silly, and then also we get super serious about, any topic that we cover, around, Malcolm X and African American history and things like that. And then we'll turn around and just die laughing at Nene on Real Housewives. So I love that we can do that, and I love that the public allows us to not just be intellectuals, but human beings.
And speaking of, the kind of seriousness that occurs on Twitter, we lost Manning Marable on Friday, April the 1st. And one of the things that Twitter has, struck me about Twitter is that this collective mourning project that we can go about when folks who matter to us pass on, and all the love that we've seen for Manning Marable since Friday on Twitter and the celebration of his book. Talk a little bit about what that was like, being able to share with other Black scholars and other activists, regardless of race, about how important Manning Marable was, but also to talk about the impact that Manning Marable and his work had on you also.
Yeah, it was fabulous. Let me preface this by saying that I just came back from Jackson, Mississippi for the Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Conference. And we had a salute to the ancestors in the middle of the conference, and Vincent Harding was our moderator. Yeah. And we love Vincent Harding, right? And so Vincent Harding from There's a River, people.
Right.
So
and my best friend's cousin, actually. So I met Vincent when I was 14 years old. Okay. So he's family. Yeah.
So Vincent Harding, he had people. First of all, he had us gather together a little bit closer because we were sort of spread out, and he pulled us together and then said, if you knew these people, if you knew Ron Walters, if you knew, Reverend Lucius Walker, if you knew Howard Zinn, you have to speak their names and talk about them. And so he actually invited people who had any type of a relationship to speak on them. And so what happened on Twitter when Dr. Manning Marable passed away, it was fantastic because you just saw, I didn't even have to do a search. I didn't even have to look for a hashtag. I just had Manning Marable in my timeline almost every 3 to 5 tweets. And it was so beautiful because, first of all, as scholars, we live in an anti-intellectual society. As scholars, we're not celebrated or appreciated in that way. And for someone like Manning Marable, who was like uber scholar, super scholar, he deserved that. I love the fact that his name was called so many times and we referenced him. I did not have the privilege of having Dr. Marable as a professor. I'm sure that would have been fantastic. He was someone to which I aspired to work with or be around. I wanted to be published in Souls. I looked forward to it. But when I was a graduate student, I was one of the first members of the Black Radical Congress, and Dr. Marable was one of the organizers, along with, Cordell West was there in support, and I have to give a shout out, of course, to Dr. Barbara Ransby, who wrote her book on Ella Baker. The Black Radical Congress was one of the best experiences in my life. It hurts that the BRC doesn't exist because that's exactly what we need. I saw it as a merging of scholarship and activism. And I love the fact that we had a really clear class conscientiousness and democracy. And I'll give you 2 examples. One is that many of our speakers, I remember one of our speakers being from a catfish farm from the Mississippi Delta, okay? And she spoke about her experiences, and that was going to be one of our campaigns to line up, and help them. I love that. I love the fact that, democratically speaking, the moderators were all instructed. If you were in any type of breakout group or if you were in the big room, first of all, everybody only had about 30 seconds to a minute to speak. And when you have a lot of people, that allows more voices. You have to have some rules and regulations. And second of all, they were conscientious about the gender balance. So you did not hear from man after man after man. No offense, man. But, it was great. They purposefully sought to balance things out. And so I learned so much. And it was somewhat short-lived. And I remember that Dr. Marable, he was upset because there was somewhat of a divide in the BRC because some people felt that we should not have any funding from the Ford Foundation. And his point was, look, money comes from different places. It doesn't mean that it's going to totally control our movement. This is a people-centered movement, but you have to have some type of infrastructure. You have to have some type of assistance. So I remember that email. I felt sick in my stomach when I saw the email where he had resigned. And surprise, surprise, all those so-called radicals who claimed we were going to do this and do that, they didn't do nothing, okay? So it taught me everything I needed to know. So we miss you, Dr. Marable, and I definitely look forward to reading Malcolm X, Life of Reinvention. I can't wait.
You've been watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We were joined this afternoon by the brilliant and the beautiful Kimberly Ellis, aka Dr. Goddess. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, Kim. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and exchange with you, and we got to make sure to have you on the show again.
Yes, please do. And hey, check me out at drgoddess.com and also on Twitter as Dr. Goddess, no spaces. Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
Take care, Kim.
Take care.
Well, I don't really think it's a controversy, but the comment that he made at the age that he was, I thought it was real ignorant. But I feel him because of what he was going through. But I know he regrets it now because of the backlash that he's getting from it. But at the time, I know he had a certain feeling about Duke players. So that's the reason. But, you know, I understand what he was coming from, but now I really know for a fact that he regrets it and wish that he was a Duke player at this moment. But he's just a Michigan player that just caught the backlash from a bad comment.
I think Jalen was stupid for saying something like that. Not necessarily stupid for feeling like that, because I don't know what motivated those feelings, but to say something like that, coming from Jalen, someone that's in the public's eye, you know, let's face it, a lot of people look up to Jalen. You know, he's a role model, whether you want to be or not, and they'll believe what he say. And you don't want kids, especially coming from where he came from, to think that it's cool to be stupid, or, in his term, Uncle Tomish, to be at an institution like Duke. You would actually be stupid not to go, you know, if you could get in. And I take my hat off, because I don't really like Duke basketball. You know, I like the Duke Hospital. The institution itself has high standards. I just don't like their style of play. But when Jalen made those comments, I started looking at the players that play for Duke a little differently. These are guys that I think represented where they're from, their race, since Jalen brought race into it. I think they represented their race very well. I hadn't heard of any trouble that those guys have gotten into. They went there, they played basketball for Coach K's style. Some gone on to the NBA, some gone on to coaching, business, you know, and so, you know, my hat's off to those guys, and I think they're really the role model, you know. And like I said, my feelings toward Jalen has kind of flipped, because I wish I would have gotten more from Jalen, explaining, you know, really where that came from and where he's at now. Because, you know, I really hope that we can change that feeling that, hey, look, you know, what, you wouldn't play golf because you have mostly whites that play golf. I mean, it's a great sport. If you want to play golf, you enjoy golf because of the sport, not because of who played it, you know, or what happened in the past. And the same thing with Duke. You know, if you want to compete in this world, and you're bringing Duke University to the table versus some other universities, I think your chances with Duke will be pretty good. You know, so like I said, once again, not liking Jalen's comments. I think it was very stupid. Now that's my word. You know, that's a strong word, but like I said, I think it was stupid to make them comments.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and we're joined this afternoon by Professor Randal Jelks, a professor of American Studies and African American Studies at the University of Kansas. How are you doing this afternoon, Randal?
I'm doing well, Mark. How you doing?
I'm good. So it's Tuesday, and it's the day after the NCAA basketball championship. The Big East represented as UConn defeated Butler, you know, who was there for the second year. And of course, last year, Butler, you know, lost to the Duke Blue Devils. And the Duke Blue Devils have been in the news a little bit these last couple of weeks. Our good friend Jalen Rose, who executive produced a wonderful documentary on ESPN called The Fab Five, and it's part of ESPN's 30-30 series. And you know, let me just say to the audience, this is just some of the best television that's out there. You know,
it is indeed.
Unafraid to take on difficult issues, particularly around race and all these kinds of range of things. And you know, you had the opportunity to see. Well, let me just ask you, you know, what did you think of the Fab Five documentary?
I thought it was riveting, actually, and very poignant. And I thought it raised so many issues that we're still dealing with today, especially among student athletes, and particularly African American male student athletes.
You know, one of the things that struck me about the documentary, and it's something that, you know, they reinforced over and over again, the economic realities for for college basketball players, right? You know, kids who get a scholarship and a per diem, you know, when they travel, who are making millions of dollars for their institutions, millions of dollars for the NCAA, and yet they're almost living hand to hand within this kind of situation. And it's that great scene, you know, when Jalen, you know, talks about, you know, them traveling around, walking around Ann Arbor and seeing Nike gear, you know, with their names and with their numbers and even black socks, you know, like the ones that they wore. And they recognized that they were not benefiting at all, you know, financially from what clearly was like this, you know, financial juggernaut, you know, in the NCAA at that particular point in time.
Well, sure. And I'm an alum of the University of Michigan. And as an alum of the University of Michigan, I thought that the school made a great deal of money off those kids. Michigan has an exclusive contract, such as the same as my Duke might have,
Right.
and they made bunches of money off of them.
One of the things, of course, that had attracted everybody's attention about the documentary, you know, Jalen Rose made some very pointed comments about how he felt as an 18-year-old, and upset that he wasn't recruited by Duke to play. And he talked about what kind of player he thought that Duke University would recruit, what kind of black player. And he described them as Uncle Tom players. And of course, it started off a firestorm, some of which he backtracked on. But, you know, I thought the controversy was interesting in that, you know, Jalen obviously knew what the response to those comments would be. He was the executive producer, and it seemed as though he really wanted us to have a conversation about the implications that there are certain kinds of black folks who are allowed to cross over and achieve in the mainstream, whether that is as a college basketball player at Duke, or we could be even talking about the President of the United States in that context.
Sure. Or as a student, who gets recruited, for what reason, how do they look, where they come from. I thought, as I've written also, that Jalen used the word like I hear kids in the street using the word all the time, Uncle Tom, to represent a class,
Right.
A class differentiation.
Right.
And I think he had nothing to apologize for in that regard, because he said, I used to think like that, but I mean, absolutely,
Right.
That's how he felt.
Right. You wrote a wonderful piece at the Black Bottom, Race and Economic Status and the Legacy of the Fab Five. Talk a little bit about the piece and what you were trying to convey, you know, with your own kind of analysis of the Fab Five documentary and Jalen's comments. And more importantly, I think, you know, Grant Hill's response and then also Coach K's response.
Right. Well, you know, I teach at a school that has basketball as its chief sport. And I'm often disturbed the way...
And used to have a Duke University graduate as its coach, right? And Tommy
correct.
Amaker, yeah.
That's correct. But I'm also teaching at Kansas, so basketball is God here,
right.
at Kansas. And I'm often disturbed by the way young black men are recruited, the way they are formed. And that documentary just once again reminded me of the things that troubled me about college basketball. And I love the sport. I'm a city kid, high school years in Chicago, so I love basketball. But I am disturbed by, you know, how many kids get thrown away in the system. So I wrote this piece because, one, I had a reaction to the movie. That's how visceral it was. Two, I wanted people to differentiate the class structure that's going on between Grant Hill and Jalen Rose at the time, and get us to talking about race and class implications. My piece was pretty critical of Coach K, but not only Coach K, the University of Michigan's president, Mary Sue Coleman, for how they handled this. I mean, Ann Arbor is 40 miles from Detroit, and I really think that we need to be talking about this. Just as Duke is not far from a black working class community.
Well, it's in a black, right? I mean, Duke is
It
literally
is
in a black.
Formerly one. That's
Right.
right. That's right. Absolutely right.
And, and some of these issues are really, amazing. I mean, they're timeless, right? Because, I can remember when I was 25 years old and watching, Duke play UNLV 2 years in a row, and then, of course, playing, the Fab Five. And I can't say that my opinions of Duke basketball were that much different, as a 25-year-old. Clearly I would say that early in my career I never thought, given my own background, that I would ever be a professor at Duke. So I understood those kind of class dynamics in real kind of significant ways. I mean, one of the things I thought was interesting about the discussion, in some ways Jalen's documentary speaks to a very specific audience, right? And it's multiracial and it's diverse. But Grant's response in the New York Times, I think, reaches a different audience, and they may not be the same audiences.
Correct. Grant got the opportunity because he is Grant Hill, who his parents are. They're both Yale graduates, to speak in the New York Times as the representative kind of black athlete. And I respect what he was trying to say. Although I felt he squandered his opportunity to say more. He could have talked about how it was to play against kids who felt that he was a privileged kid, and they weren't. I'm sure they gave him a hard time. That made him a tougher basketball player. But I felt like excuse me for saying, for a Duke education, he didn't bring a lot of analytical tools to his writing. And I'm sure a Duke education costs more than the Kansas one.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with Professor Randal Maurice Jelks, a professor of American Studies and African American Studies at the University of Kansas, the author of African Americans in the Furniture City, The Struggle for Civil Rights in Grand Rapids, the University of Illinois Press, 2006, and the forthcoming Schoolmaster of the Movement, Benjamin E. Mays, A Religious Rebel in Jim Crow America, which is under contract with University of North Carolina Press. One of the things I thought was interesting about this discussion, and it raised some part of the controversy. I mean, I think black folks heard Jalen Rose's comments and they kind of shrugged, right? I mean, this is the conversation that Du Bois and Du Bois and Booker T. Washington were having, 100 years ago, right? This is the conversation that field slaves and house slaves were having, 200 years ago. So, it's not new. But there are a different set of eyes, right? There's a white gaze on this conversation that hasn't been there before. And whether we're talking about Coach K's response, of being offended or various newscasters and pundits who weighed in on this. I mean, this really is a family conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a family conversation, but I would differ a little bit. I think it's more. I think it's the family conversation, but in the family we rarely talk about class in public, and I think it's well overdue that we talk about it in public. I think we don't all come from the same place. Valerie Jarrett, who works for the president, certainly she and I went to high school within a mile of each other. Our experiences are quite different.
Radical, yeah.
And so she was at University of Chicago Lab School, and I was at a public high school within mile or 2 miles of each other. And so we should have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been watching Left of Black. We're joined this afternoon by Professor Randal Maurice Jelks, Professor of American Studies and African American Studies at the University of Kansas. Randal, thanks for joining us this afternoon and talking about a subject that I'm hoping that we'll have more serious discussion about in the future.
Well, Mark, I appreciate it so much being invited on Left of Black, and thank you so much for this opportunity to begin a conversation that we should have more and more.
Thanks. Take care, Randal.
All right. Peace, my brother.
Peace.
Trying on your
produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.